share. Oh, thank you. I want to share some thoughts on the parasha. And, when I paid tribute to Rabbi Harlow, I noted that there are times when I will quibble or criticize with his translation, which brings me back to another one of my pet peeves, which is the habit of American Jews to translate the word mitzvah as good deed. Okay. And one of the things that makes me very happy the past few years is that the Jewish Federation, and we participate in it every year. And yesterday or the day before, Charlotte sent me an email with the plans for our participation this year. It is not called Mitzvah Day. It is called Good Deeds Day, right? Because the word mitzvah does not mean good deed, right? What does it mean? First person to jump in wins.
Commandment.
I saw Gail said something, but she was muted. So D.
Commandment, something required.
Commandment, right? So we have 10 commandments, right? We don't have 10 suggestions, right? Judaism is a religion of rules, not suggestions. Now, whether we follow them or not is a different matter. But in general, the Torah phrases itself in thou shalt and thou shalt not if you think this will be beneficial to you, or maybe it's a good idea, or if it's not too inconvenient, right? They are mitzvot, they are commandments, right? Which makes the beginning of this week's parasha unusual, right? Because it says, Kol asher yidvenu libo, right? In this parsha, we read that the offerings for the building of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, they had to be voluntary. You shall accept gifts from every person whose heart so moves him, okay? Right, so it's voluntary. If your heart moves you to contribute, you contribute. If your heart doesn't move you to contribute, you don't contribute. And this is sharply contrasted, as I said, in more years than not, this parasha combines with coincides with Shabbat Shekalim, and Shabbat Shekalim talks about the half shekel temple tax that every male from age 20, I don't remember if the upper is 50 or 60, but everyone had to bring a half shekel. And if you're poor, too bad. You can't bring less. And if you're rich, you can't bring more. Everybody has to bring exactly half a shekel, right? That was for the maintenance of the tabernacle, right? But for the construction of the tabernacle, it had to be free will, okay? And then in a couple of weeks, the builders of the tabernacle are going to come to Moses and they're going to raise a problem, okay? And what is the problem that the builders raise? People are bringing too much. They're donating too much. Tell them, please, to stop, okay? I mean, I'm reminded of what Dee said last night, talking about people contributing towards the concert that we're having next month. And Dee was pleased and surprised by the generosity of so many people, but she did not say, therefore, please stop donating.
Please don't
right?
stop.
right? Please don't stop donating, right? But here, the people are bringing too much. Tell them to stop. I don't know. I get this image of Lucy and Ethel when they're working in the candy factory and they can't keep up, right? So the builders can't keep up with all of the stuff that the people are donating. Okay, and then it says, right, Va'asuli mikdash b'shahanti bitoham, not bitoho. They shall build me a tabernacle that I may dwell among them. Not they shall build me a tabernacle that I may dwell in it, right? The point is that God doesn't need a house. God lives everywhere. The building of the tabernacle is not necessary so that God can have some place to live. It's a concrete gesture of love for God so that God dwells among the people. And this is why it has to be voluntary. Okay, and Rabbi Jonathan Sachs contrasts the building of the tabernacle with the building of the temple by Solomon, which Gail chanted in the Haftarah, and he says that only in retrospect do we understand why it was so important that gifts for the tabernacle be voluntary. Solomon imposed both tremendous taxes and forced labor. Okay, it says in the Parsha mas, which in modern Hebrew means a tax, but the tax wasn't monetary. The tax was conscription of people for forced labor. The word for that, a fancy word for that, is corvée. Okay, so he sent 30,000 Israelites to Lebanon to cut cedar, and he had 70,000 carriers and 80,000 stone cutters. Okay, and the words that the Haftarah uses to describe the building projects are the same words that it uses to describe the buildings that our ancestors built as slaves in Egypt. Right now, the word is avadim, slaves, but it wasn't like chattel slavery like in the American South, right? It was forced labor on behalf of the king, right? And the words are exactly the same. The people supervising the building are sarim, and that's the same in Exodus. And what do the sarim do? They rodim ba'am. Okay, the same exact words. So what Solomon did is, in essence, really no different than what the Egyptians did, right? And after Solomon's death, his son and successor, Rehoboam, imposes the same taxes and the same corvée, and the people rebel, and the kingdom is split, never to be reunited. So the most powerful and successful king laid the groundwork for the failure of his own dynasty, right? And as Gail was reading this morning, and I was paying attention, and it struck me again how apropos the reading is. So let me see if I can bring it up. Yeah. Okay. So look at verse 12 and 13. Okay. With regard to this house you are building, if you follow my laws and observe my rules and faithfully keep my commandments, I will fulfill for you the promise that I gave to your father David. I will abide among the children of Israel, and I will never forsake my people Israel. Right? And if you look at this, right, the first 5 words in verse 12 are really superfluous. Habayit hazeh asher ata boneh. This house which you are building, and the rest of it has nothing to do with the house, right? The house will be well established if you follow my mitzvot and keep my commandments. And if you do that, I will dwell among the children of Israel, and I will never forsake my people Israel. It's got nothing to do with the temple that Solomon just built, right? God doesn't say, all right, now that you built the temple, I can dwell among the people Israel. It says, now that you built the temple, keep my mitzvot, right? Now that you built the temple, keep my mitzvot, and I'll dwell not in the temple, but I'll dwell among the people of Israel. Okay, and when David, Solomon's father, first conceived the plan of building the temple, God sent word through the prophet Nathan. Okay, and I have to say, there was one time, if you could meet anybody in the Bible, who would it be? Okay, and one time I actually answered Nathan the prophet. I mean, he's not as well known as some of the other figures, but Nathan the prophet had tremendous chutzpah. I mean, and tremendous bravery, right? I mean, if King David was, I mean, you could say that if that Nathan was King David's Alexei Navalny, and if David had been a little bit less scrupulous, he would have had Nathan put to death. Point out that he did have other people put to death, but maybe he was scared to do so to Nathan. But Nathan goes in to David to talk about the project because David wants to build the temple, and God says no. And this is what God says through Nathan. I have not dwelt in a house from the day I brought the Israelites up out of Egypt to this day. I've been moving from place to place with the tent as my dwelling. Wherever I have moved with all the Israelites, did I ever say to any of their rulers whom I commanded to shepherd my people Israel, why have you not built me a house of cedar? There is a hint here, Rabbi Sachs says, that God disclosed to David the danger involved in the project. And only later did it become clear. And Solomon's son could have salvaged the situation, but he didn't listen to the advice that the elders gave him. And more importantly, he didn't listen to what God said, right? God didn't really talk about the importance of the temple. He spoke about the importance of observing the mitzvot. And again, Rabbi Sachs says there's a profound theological statement here. The free God desires the free worship of free human beings. It says in the Talmud in Avodah Zarah, page 3a, the holy blessed one does not behave tyrannically to his creatures, right? So it's not an accident, but it's essential that the first house of God, small, fragile, portable, the opposite of the grandeur of the temple, was built by free, uncoerced, voluntary contribution. God lives not in houses of wood and stone, but in the minds and souls of free human beings. God is not found in monumental architecture. God is found in the willing heart. Okay, and I agree with what Rabbi Sachs says here, right? And if you look at, I mean, what is one of the great struggles in contemporary Israel, right? Which has been a struggle almost since the creation of the state up until now, is religious coercion, right? Religious coercion. And the effect of religious coercion is to make religion something that other Israelis hate, right? They hate it. I mean, Mike, you and I have spoken about this a lot because your Israeli friends say that, right? And I remember asking an Israeli Orthodox friend um, if the rabbinate of Israel, the chief rabbinate, decided for the next year, our main task is to convince secular Israelis that Judaism is racist, picayune, and oppressive, what would they do differently than what they're doing now? And she had no answer, right? Because that is the effect of religious coercion in Israel. And it will be the effect, I mean, if the evangelicals get their way in this country, the result will not be a religious revival. It will be that, and if you look, I mean, the number of people in the younger generations who call themselves spiritual but not religious is massive, right? Spiritual but not religious would probably be the second largest denomination in America after the Catholic Church, right? And these are people who find spirituality important, but religion oppressive, right? And God wants us to be free, right? And God, which doesn't mean we should do whatever we want. God has given us commandments, right? But the commandments we follow voluntarily. We don't follow the commandments because God forces us to, and we know that, right? I mean, nobody, I mean, maybe your spouse, I don't know, but nobody forced you to be here this morning. You chose to be here. You could be outside making a snowman before the snow all disappears, but you're here, right? I mean, and that is a choice. And the best service of God is the service of God that's entered into voluntarily. And ultimately, the disaster that the building of Solomon's temple created in the splitting of the kingdom and a civil war really shows that. Shabbat Shalom. If there's any questions or comments, please go ahead. We're particularly not in any rush this morning.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
in the text, it refers to the Lebanon. And I think it also the same with the cedar. What is the significance of that?
Well, all right. So it's just in biblical Hebrew. I mean, in modern Hebrew, that country is called Lebanon. But in biblical Hebrew, it was called Ha-Lebanon. I don't really know why. I mean, there are certain places that are always, right? We talk about the Levant, right? Or it was a very big deal, for example, when the name of the country was changed from the Ukraine to Ukraine, right? And many of us still sometimes slip and talk about the Ukraine. But the point is, right? I mean, cedars of Lebanon, right? There are a lot of cemeteries called cedars of Lebanon, um, and there are also hospitals, right? Like Sinai Cedars is the big hospital in L.A. It's a merger of two, Sinai and Cedars of Lebanon. It, in the Bible, it is right. Like we also say, "Tzadik katamar yifrach," right? The righteous shall blossom like a palm tree. Ke'erez balvanon yiskeh, right? Like a cedar in Lebanon, it will grow, it will prosper, right? That it's a symbolism for the well-being that comes from righteousness, because Lebanon, and to this day, I mean, if you look at the flag of Lebanon, right, the symbol in the flag of Lebanon is a cedar, right? So that goes back thousands and thousands of years, right? So there was peace between Solomon and Hiram. Hiram in English, was the king of Lebanon, and they had a treaty, and so Solomon was able to get the cedars for building the temple from Lebanon. Anyone else? Okay, great. So I'll stop the recording.